Brilliant. Okay, so keep those introductions coming. If it's your first time here, hello, welcome. This is a webinar titled Accessibility in a Short Form Social Media Landscape. And if you are returning, you've been to one of our webinars before, thank you so much for coming back. Lovely to have you all here. A little bit about HDK, if you are not familiar with us. We are a digital agency based in London, working across web projects and digital marketing in the arts, culture and heritage sector. Really excited to have you all here today. I think the topic is going to be really interesting one. And of course, we have our lovely panelists with us today. So it will make for a really exciting webinar. More introductions coming into the chat.
And then I'm doing a general audience as well.
Great. Hello, everyone. Just picking up the last of those now. Lovely to meet you all. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start today's session with a couple of introductions. First, we're going to start with the HDK team that are here today running the panel. So you have myself, my name is Fiz, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm an account executive here at HDK, working in the marketing team. I have long brown hair, brown eyes, and today I'm wearing a white t-shirt and a black cardigan over the top. We also have Bella here with us, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Bella.
Hi everyone, really good to see everyone in the chat. I'm Bella, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman in my 20s. I've got short dark hair and wearing a little colourful cardigan today. So yeah, I'm excited to introduce the panelists who are going to be speaking with us today.
Yeah, so we have three brilliant panelists who have come to join us on today's webinar on accessibility from two brilliant organisations. So the first one is Para Orchestra. Para Orchestra brings together professional, disabled and non-disabled musicians to create powerful music experiences that span genres and art forms. As a result, they are radically changing outdated ideas about both orchestral music and of disability. And my colleague Molly has just popped in their details into the chat if you're interested in taking a look. We are also joined by Lily from Stopgap Dance Company. Established in 1995, Stopgap Dance Company is a global leader in inclusivity in dance. Driven by a diverse creative team using dance as movement for change, their mission is to create an inclusive and equitable world where diversity is pursued. So lovely to have you all with us today. If we start with Laura, if you would like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Fiz. Lovely to meet you all. My name's Laura Evans. I'm head of communications at Power Orchestra, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a light-skinned woman in my late 40s with long brown hair and glasses and a fringe. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a fluffy, brightly coloured cardigan, which is quite itchy, I must admit.
Okay, great. And now, Ben, if you would like to introduce yourself quickly.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining the call. My name is Ben Horton. My pronouns are he and him. I'm Power Orchestra's digital marketing manager. I am a white man in my 30s with short dark hair, and I'm wearing a black sweatshirt. And yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. And finally, Lily.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Lily. I'm content and access artist with Stopgap. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a white autistic person in my late 20s. I have lots of tattoos and piercings, and I'm wearing some glasses. And my curly brown hair is piled up on top of my head, and I'm wearing a black jumpsuit today.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'll just run through what we're going to cover today in the session. So I'm going to lead a quick 5-minute introduction on the topic, and then we will move into the panel discussion, which is what you're all here for. And then we'll do a quick survey, and fingers crossed we have time for a Q&A at the very end, hoping for about 10 minutes. If you have any questions as we're talking, as we're presenting, please pop those in the chat and we will try to answer those when we have a bit of time at the end. Okay, great. So I just wanted to start off with a bit of an interactive question for you all. And the question is, what does the term accessibility mean to you? I want you to be really honest here. This is an open space, a space where we're all learning, and we'd be really interested to know, is accessibility actually something that doesn't mean a lot to you right now, but you want it to mean much more to your organization? It's quite a broad term. It's a term that I think we struggle to define in the arts and culture industry perfectly. So I'd be really interested to know your thoughts. You can just pop a one-word answer in the chat, or a couple of sentences, and perhaps my colleague Bella could read a few of those out.
Absolutely. There's just a beautiful one that's come into the chat by Caroline, who says, Maya Minga says, access is love, and that resonates strongly with me. I think that's a really lovely way of describing it. Being open and understanding of other people.
Wow, yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it. I don't know that quote. I'll have to look that one up.
And if you also want to describe sort of oh, I've just got another few comments coming in. That's great. Rowan says access in the minimum. And Alice says making sure, oh, getting a few more comments, making sure everyone can access, experience, enjoy what we put out there. I think that's a really core part of it, is making sure people don't have barriers to what you put out into the world, or as few barriers as possible. And we'll be touching on barriers during the discussion. From Jake, which says, we want our audience to be able to engage with us on their own terms. Exactly.
Yeah, there's some really great answers coming through. Please keep sharing if you're comfortable doing so. It's really important that we discuss this as different arts and culture organisations, and we keep the conversation going. So I'm just going to share this quick term with you, or quick definition that was on the UK government website. This says accessibility means more than putting things online. It means making your content and design clear and simple enough so that most people can use it without needing to adapt it, while supporting those who do not need to adapt things. I thought this was a really interesting definition that the government has put online, and it does imply more towards the idea of online content, so websites, but I think it's really applicable to social media as well. And hopefully this has started to get you all thinking about the topic that we're about to discuss. Very quick note just to say that today is about short form content. So I've put some examples of reels on the screen. So we are talking mainly about short form videos, which you can find on Instagram. You can find on most things now, YouTube Shorts, TikTok. I'm sure that it will bleed into other areas, so feel free to still ask questions, but this is what the centre of the conversation will be today. And now I'm going to pass on to my colleague Bella to lead the panel discussion.
Thanks, Viz. There's been some more really great comments in the chat about what people understand accessibility to be. So those are really nice to see, and a lovely way to start this conversation. I'm really excited to be chatting with our great panelists here today from Stopgap and Para Orchestra. And I think, as Viz has mentioned, in arts and culture, we all talk about accessibility quite a lot, have an understanding and an awareness of it, but our levels of experience might vary quite a lot, and that can be experience or understanding or resources in an organization. But you're probably here today because you want to improve that and learn from each other. So that's a really nice way to start that's really great. And we welcome questions throughout. I'll go through 3 questions with the panelists, and then afterwards we'll have a bit of time for a short audience Q&A. So pop your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So we'll start off with the first question, which is just coming up on screen. And that's, is short form content an inherently inaccessible format, or can we engage with it in a way that's socially responsible? There's quite a lot in this question, I think. And just to give a bit of context around it, like Fizz has mentioned, short form content kind of refers to those TikTok videos or Instagram reels or short form media that is quick, quite rapid, very visually driven, and usually in a video format. And we know that can also cause some limits in terms of accessibility. I'd like to ask the panelists then how we might be able to use short form content to reach new audiences while upholding those social responsibility commitments. So I'm going to pick you out one by one, and then hopefully we'll have a little discussion around this. So maybe we can start with Lily from Stopgap. If you have some thoughts around this first one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I don't think that as a format it's necessarily inherently inaccessible, but I do think, however, like the way that many companies and people approach it and engage with it can present challenges that make it less inclusive for some audiences, in particular deaf and disabled audiences. I think, like you've mentioned, one of the biggest challenges with the format is that it is highly visual, and short videos and images may lack any descriptive text or auditory information, supporting people to understand the content. And platforms like Instagram and TikTok are designed for this highly visual content. However, without considering access, it can alienate blind and visually impaired audiences when it's purely sort of visual focused. And then, videos without captions can exclude those who are deaf or hard of hearing. And yeah, I think slowly we're seeing more and more people doing things and adding captions, but I often see quite inaccessible styles of captioning. Yeah, I think also in a rush to respond to trends and content and be really super responsive and feed the algorithm. Often accessibility considerations are kind of left behind. And it might take a couple of extra minutes to do something like add an image description, but it's worth it. It is more than just good practice. It shows that you care about your audiences. It shows that you want them to be able to engage and respond with what you're putting out there. So yeah, I definitely think that there are ways that we can engage with social media that are more socially responsible. Ensuring we're thinking about access, and ensure we're not alienating anyone cognitively by thinking about clear messaging, and breaking down complex ideas. And also ensure.
Pause very quickly. I think there's a little something on your mic is hitting a little bit while you're talking.
Sorry.
So there we go. That's all good. Sorry.
That's all right. If I hold it really awkwardly like this, then it'll be, hopefully
Like
that's
the video itself. Yeah, perfect. That's great. Thank you, Lily.
Yeah. I think just finishing up, ensuring that we're representing a diversity of voices and perspectives in our messaging as well. I've kind of lost where I got to with that, so I'm really happy to pass on to Ben and Laura.
Completely my fault for interrupting you, but Ben or Laura, would be great to hear your thoughts as well on this question, leading on from Lily.
Well, I know that when we talked about this last week, Ben had lots of interesting things to say on this. I think it's a really, really good question, and I'm really interested to hear from you, Lily, and anyone else in the webinar really on their points of view. But I think what's kind of important to remember is that it's not possible to make all content accessible to everyone. I think starting with a majority is a really good place to start. Like with our live work that we produce here at Power Orchestra, and given the type of organisation we are, and we work with a large amount of people with different types of disabilities, we don't, with our live work, aim to make each one of those shows accessible to everyone, and that's kind of the sort of approach that we take with our content creation as well. Ben, you had some good thoughts on this earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I would somewhat agree, and I think Lily, what you said in your answer was really brilliant. But I do think that thinking about short form platforms, such as TikTok, Insta, and everything, I think it's quite important to consider the reason why they're set up isn't necessarily to deliver information in the most concise and the most accessible way. They basically exist to drive engagement, and to maximize the amount of time users are spending on the platform, and that can quite often set you up in these slightly oppositional terms, where you're perhaps trying to deliver a message, or articulate something in a way which is really clear and accessible and understanding, but you might not be getting incentivized by the platform to do that, if that makes sense. So I think that Yeah, I think that it is possible to engage with short form content in a way which is socially responsible, but I think sometimes it's about mitigating against those difficulties, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point to make as well, is that we're almost in a bit of a battle with these platforms sometimes because, we know that their effect on mental health a lot of the time. We know that their aim is to be, to draw profit from us, from our attention. So how can we engage on those platforms in a more responsible way that adds value to people who are watching and seeing what we're doing? I see a few questions coming in, so we'll try and get to those at the end. I think this might be a nice point to move on to question 2, which is just coming up on screen now, which are what are the barriers presented by short form video content? And I guess this is drawing a bit from the first question. That short form video is really popular across social media audiences, but it can really present these barriers, issues like that Lily has raised, missing subtitles for people who are hearing impaired, or maybe rapid pacing that's hard to follow, and those highly visual formats that we've mentioned. And for arts and culture organizations, of course, a lot of the time we have limited resources that can make producing accessible content a bit harder. So I'd like to again pose this to the panelists and ask, what are those main barriers that you've found or you've seen other organizations come across when it comes to creating this kind of content? Maybe we can start with Laura and Ben this time.
Sure. I mean, I'll speak very openly from our point of view. I think that often it lacks a strategic framework. It's often we are creating content to document something that's happening, whether that's a live work in creation or the applause at the end of a show, or whether it's capturing a moment in one of our artist development workshops. And at the moment, we aren't incredibly strategic about how that comes together. So it's often missing a bit of a thread. And I think it is often responsive and reactive and in the moment. And it is then hard to build in accessibility. I mean, ideally, we all know that if you're creating content, ideally you build in accessibility from the start. But if it is responsive and in the moment, that's a lot harder to do. And like you were saying just then, Bella, like in terms of the speed in which we are delivered content and then we consume content, it can be things like just getting captions up, and there's no time for a content warning, because as soon as you put a content warning up, somebody's moved on to the next thing because you've already used up 4 seconds of valuable attention time. So, I mean, Ben is our lead content creator. I don't know if you've got any, more to add on that.
I mean, yeah, I think you've made some good points there. I think one thing which, and I think there was a question pertaining to this in the chat from Caroline, is quite often, because we are primarily, for our live work, we're a touring organization, and so we're quite often working in collaboration with the content on the marketing team at a venue, for example, who they themselves, might create something, invite us to be a collaborator on it, but it's not captioned, there's no video description, etc., etc. And that can be, I think that's just a challenge you face. And I'm very sympathetic to people working in venues who have dozens and dozens of shows, and often I think possibly slightly under-resourced when it comes to this kind of thing. And I think it's just about making sure that you're having those conversations at the jump, and that it's not something which is getting obfuscated or glossed over in the busyness of a live performance day. I think that, yeah, Laura, what you said about kind of reactive content, I think another thing for us is most of the performances, or even a small workshop day for us is quite a production intense environment. So if we want to try and work with a member of our ensemble to produce some content with them, it can be quite difficult even just to find 45 minutes in the schedule to say, hey, is it okay to take you out of what you're doing and out of your creative process and, kind of plonk you in front of a camera? And I think it's, being sensitive to that, and understanding that, what, not kind of railroading someone's day to make a reel. And I think also accepting that, content creation is work as well. And so it's not ever fair, I think, to ask someone to kind of, oh, would you mind sticking around for an extra hour at the end of your day so that we can do some recording on top of this, and really having to build it into the schedule or find a way to otherwise reimburse people for their time and their labor. Anything else for this? Yeah, I think that would be my initial response to that question.
Great, thank you. There's already so much coming out of this. And I'm going to pass over to Lily and see whether you have any thoughts coming out of that.
Yeah. I think definitely one of the biggest ones is time. And like Ben mentioned, the format in itself does not give you a lot of time really, or it wants you to keep driving it and creating and putting things out there for this engagement. So it's not necessarily considering that connection. And time in wanting to respond to something, whether that's you wanting to respond to your activity or to a trend, or in having a very small amount of human resources, it can mean that we don't often have a lot of time to devote to ensuring our content is accessible. For us at Stopgap, I think we tend to go towards sort of evergreen content that we can take our time in creating, and having the input of company members in creating too, because that's really important to us in being able to share the voices of people within our company, and it's not just us in the social media team that are sort of driving it. But understanding trends and participating in them, that can be a barrier for some people, about understanding them, and also knowing how you align with a trend maybe. I think there are some I definitely think the fast pace of social media can be alienating, both for people consuming it and people creating it. And these quickly changing visuals, quick information delivery can be really overwhelming. And I definitely think a lot about the sort of ethics of platforms when we're consistently being pushed content, what effect that has on our brains, particularly for younger audiences. I think about how I'm contributing to this idea of content and what that means as an artist. That's probably a whole other conversation, but and there's other sort of more, I don't know if you'd call them like logistical things, but things like text limitations. So you can't always provide that extra content or information, or you can't always link within comments to other pieces of information. The things that get prioritized in an algorithm are often like this quite sensational content, not necessarily. And I think there's also something in there around like potentially like design and aesthetics, and the way people don't necessarily always approach that thinking of access. It's rather like, does this look good, or does this fit within like this new I don't rather than thinking about, oh, can someone actually access this information? Those are some of my thoughts.
But I think that's brought up some really interesting questions as well from that. And I think from what Laura and Ben were saying, there's of course a lot of internal barriers when it comes to creating the short form video content in the first place. And then when it gets put out into the world, there's barriers for people accessing that. I wanted to ask quickly, as a sub question to this, what might you think are some examples of good accessible short form video content, and how, especially from the perspective of the audience, what that might look like? And I'll raise that to anyone who has an idea.
I'd say maybe one thing is about audio-led content, and how, whether it's a voiceover or it's something describing what is
happening. It does not necessarily mean it's audio description, but there's a voiceover that's talking you through this information, but then ensuring it's captioned in a way that is useful and accessible. Yeah, that's probably one off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I think there are, and perhaps I'm getting ahead of the discussion here, so please stop me if I am, but I think that there are some really simple, free to use tools for things like captioning that mean that needn't spend hours listening and typing out every single word. Like I know that CapCut has a built-in transcription system, although I just looked at it because I tend to use Premiere Pro, but I just looked on CapCut and I think they have paywalled a lot of it, but it is, that you can still technically caption things for free or create a transcript for free using that. And yeah, I think as someone's also said in the chat, I think that yeah, it's just about making sure that you have done your research and you have the tools at hand, and maybe seeing it as a bit of an iterative process as well. And I think that one thing that I often say when we're sort of reviewing or looking at our social content is that like we're not as an entity, Power Orchestra is not a publisher, and so we don't exist to publish short form video content. It's for us it's kind of a tool in our comms mix, to use a slightly dated term, and so I think that it's perhaps about giving yourself a little bit more slack in understanding and perhaps feeling away with it, finding out what does and doesn't work for the audience, asking the people who are consuming your content as well. Yeah.
Perfect. I think that's a really lovely segue into our next question as well, which is our final question to the panelists. And I can see that there's a couple of questions coming in from the chat that relate to this. So hopefully we'll get onto all of these. So we've spoken about both the internal barriers to creation and also the barriers that audiences might face. How could we overcome these? So the question up on screen is, how can we overcome these barriers? Can we find new innovative ways to make short form content accessible, or is it about learning from what's tried and tested, and how we use the platform specific tools in the best way? So posing this final one to the panelists, which is, how can we as arts and culture organisations overcome those barriers to make short form content more inclusive and more accessible to all our audiences? Given that Laura has, as Laura mentioned, you can't always reach everyone, but what are those little steps that we can take? And hopefully we can come out of this with some actions that everyone can take away. And actually about strategies and processes that might have helped. So I'm going to start with Lily on this question.
Yeah. So definitely building accessibility into your content creation plan, sort of weaving this kind of best practice into your even into your brand guidelines. So yeah, as I think Laura mentioned, nothing is ever going to be 100% accessible to absolutely everyone. And sort of aiming for progress. So maybe it's that you want to commit to the fact that you're going to remember to add alt text and an image description to everything you post. And if it's that sort of one step, and it starts to become kind of like a natural flow of how you would create things. I think some people get a bit worried about image descriptions, but yeah, it's there's some frameworks you can use around things like going from an object to its action, what it's doing, and then to the context surrounding what it is doing. And sort of my advice with image description is be as descriptive as your audience needs. If it's highly visual content, then your audience will want to know details. If it's text, then they'll want to know what the text says, that kind of thing. I could go on a lot about image descriptions, but I don't know if it's useful for people. But
yeah, please do, because I think the text also is a part of accessibility, especially when you're presenting a lot of highly visual content. So yeah, if you have any other thoughts on text.
In image descriptions, I also believe it's incredibly important to describe diversity.
So in the case of Stopgap, a lot of our content is highly visual, and it includes a diversity of people and a lot of disabled people. So we work with the people that feature in our images to ensure that the descriptions that we're writing of them are using language that they're comfortable with. So this obviously spreads out wider than just on social media, but it's something we do in our audio descriptive practices, making sure that the language we use is inclusive. Yeah, and I think for us, approaching accessibility as something that's part of our productions and our work as well, then makes it a little bit easier when we're creating content about it, because it is already in some way. For example, our new work features audio description and creative captions. So when we're filming any content around the show, we've already got a script that we can work with in creating an audio described reel, for example. Yeah, and other simple things around capitalizing the first letter of each word in a hashtag, not using too many emojis, thinking about people who are using assistive technology, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yes. So I don't know where I've gone somewhere in my thread of thought. So I'll pass over.
That's great, thank you. I think you've raised a really nice point as well, which is that especially when you're creating content and you're on the filming end, the creation side, you're working with people, and those people might have different needs as well and access requirements. So it's not only thinking about what's going up online, but also about how you're conducting, your day to day and through those processes. So I'll pass over to Laura and Ben and see if they have any other things to add to that.
Well, Lily, you gave a really brilliant and comprehensive answer there, so I'm not sure how much more I have to add. But I think it's important to agree as an organisation what you aim to achieve in terms of, again, like you just said that it isn't possible to make all content accessible to everyone, but just a few fairly small changes can have a really big impact. And I think it's about agreeing as an organisation what is realistic for you to manage resource wise, but that those goals are constantly evolving. And so it might be that you agree for this year, this is what we're going to aim to have achieved, the level of accessibility we aim to achieve by the end of the year, but we aspire to be blah blah blah. I think it's really important to create content in consultation with people with access requirements. Ideally, if they are content creators themselves, but nothing about us without us is really important to keep in mind when creating content. I think when you are, like you mentioned as well, Lily, to have accessibility in mind before you even start creating the content in the first place. I am, as Ben will testify, I'm really strict about briefs when setting out to create something, particularly if it's actually something a bit bigger. So it's helpful that you've considered how accessible the content needs to be before you even start creating it, and what needs to be in place in order to achieve that creatively and realistically. On longer form pieces, at the moment, for example, we do work with an audio describer, but it's kind of an aspiration of ours that we start to use that more creatively, that audio describer becomes part of that creative team in putting that content together, rather than it's like we make the content and he reads out what's happening. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything more that you can add to that, Ben. I'm sure there is.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I think both of you mentioned kind of setting some internal standards or goals. I mean, like when I started at Parox 3 years ago, I think since then, like obviously there unto Laura was just you, sole marketing content person, anything. But what we've done during that time is just created it literally just exists as a Google Doc of proofing practices that we use for for all kinds of web content, but including video and short form. And that's just enabled us to, as our team has grown and we've onboarded new people, it's like just having that repository of information almost, it exists as literally like a checklist. And so that is that's really useful. And then there are also a lot of good free resources out there. I know that All In are working with Attitude is Everything, and releasing a set of sort of industry-wide accessibility standards next year with sort of, I think, 4 areas, one of which is accessibility in digital comms. And so I'm sort of looking forward to see what that looks like in practice. Yeah.
Great, thank you all. Yeah, I think lots of really nice points coming out of that. Thinking about agreeing as an organization on some of those core goals that bring you to those next steps. Working in consultation with the people that you're trying to reach, and bringing that into the full process of it as well, and of course doing your own research about tips and tricks for accessibility. So we're just coming up to the end of the discussion, and I can see that Caroline's raised a hand. We've got lots of nice questions in the chat. We'd love to chat with you all, either just reading out the questions or on video. But what we'll do first is, I think that's a really lovely roundup to the end of the panel discussion, which went really quickly. So in my view, so I'd like to say a massive thank you to Ben, Lily, and Laura for sharing all of your insights. Stick around because Fiz will be taking us on to the next step of the webinar and sharing a quick survey that you can all fill out, and then we'll move on to the audience Q&A where everyone can ask all your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. That was really insightful. So if you haven't been to one of these webinars before, we do this every time. It's just a quick survey and it helps us gather feedback on your thoughts of the session, so we can keep improving them for everyone. My colleague Molly has just popped in the link into the chat. So if you click that, and we'll just have a couple of minutes where you can fill that out, and then we will very quickly move on to the Q&A. Brilliant to see so much discussion going on in the chat, and to see everybody so engaged with the topic. Okay, so just a couple of minutes to fill that out. And then once you're finished, if you could just write a quick note saying that you've completed it or done, or give a big thumbs up, and then we know that we can move on.
I've just seen in the chat that Caroline would like to share a couple of extra thoughts on accessibility best practices. So maybe we can have that while everyone's filling out the survey. So Caroline, feel free to unmute yourself and share some thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this really important topic. I just wanted to put out a few other best practices I've been describing in the chat as quickly as I can that haven't been discussed yet. The first is a video description. It functions similarly to what most people are calling alternative text, but I think you mean image descriptions, which are ones that are visible in copy to all users. A video description is just a brief description of what is going on in that video visually. The best thing for deaf-blind folks specifically is to include a video transcript or a descriptive video transcript, which incorporates all audio written out. So that includes speech as well as background noises like applause, combined with visual descriptions of what is happening on screen. There are there's disabled content creators who do use this, and I encourage you to follow them. I'll keep putting their names in the chat. So having a transcript that is part of your copy as well as a video description are both important. And then in terms of choices around captioning, boring is best. So 1 to 2 lines at a time, white text on a black background. Don't do karaoke or moving captions or captions in all caps. Those are very distracting. So yeah, look up best practices for those. And then in terms, someone asked about stories. Stories are inaccessible to screen reader users because you cannot embed alt text in them, but you can mitigate by doing things like choosing GIFs and things that don't flash too rapidly, not using strobe effects, making sure you have enough color contrast and minimal text on your stories, and most importantly, having any content shared on stories also shared on your main feed that is accessible to screen reader users. But the main takeaways there are having good captions, not making them karaoke style, having a video description, and most importantly, a video transcript, which is the only way to make videos accessible to deaf-blind folks. And transcripts are also helpful to folks who might want to translate from your copy.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I think that's really answered so many of those questions that are in the chat there. So I'm just going to do another quick reminder to those who are watching still to fill out the survey, and then we'll move as quickly as possible into the audience Q&A, where hopefully some of the panelists can also share a couple of other tips and tricks.
I also just want to mention that I think Caroline wrote in the chat earlier that she was awake at 7:30 in the morning to watch this webinar, which is amazing. Thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing all your amazing thoughts. Okay, just a couple, another minute just for the survey. If everybody could just quickly fill that out, it would be so helpful for us. While people are finishing up with that, I will just move on to mention that we have 3 more webinars coming up over the next couple months. We've got How to Maintain Your Website's Youthful Glow in November, Website and Digital Marketing Trends for 2025 in December. That's always a really fun one. The whole team gets involved and shares their thoughts. And then How to Brief for a Website that Achieves Your Organizational Goals in January. Molly will share a link to the page where you can find out more information about those. So please have a look, have a browse, and join us again if you enjoyed this webinar. And then we also have a newsletter. We send it out quarterly. We include marketing tips, industry insights, case studies, HDK updates, and lots more. We'd love to have you sign up. And again, that will be in the chat.
Thanks so much, Fiz. I think we now have a bit of time to move on to an audience Q&A. So I'm going to start off asking the panelists some of those first questions that we got in the chat, which one of them I found really interesting. I don't have the name right here, sorry, but the biggest access barrier I personally experience is the whole frenetic, AI-infected, autoplay nature of short-form video streams on all platforms. Do the panelists have any idea of how individual creators can mitigate that? That's such an interesting question, but I'll let you have a think, and if anyone has any thoughts.
I think that yeah, I that absolutely resonates with me. And unfortunately, I feel like the direction of travel with the, sort of seepage of AI into content creation is not one that fills me with hope, really. Because I think that, yeah, the amount of AI content that is possible to produce and flood a platform with a click of a button is pretty horrifying in a lot of respects. But I think as content creators ourselves, I think that you can't really be responsible for what else is on a platform, but what you can do is think about the pacing, the how you the content that you yourself are creating and responsible for, and perhaps doing your best to not feel as if you have to hop on those trends or kind of mirror what you're seeing on the platform. Yeah, I think that would be my initial response to that.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know, Lily, when we spoke last time, we had a bit of a conversation around trends as well, and the fact that you do have to bear that in mind. Not everyone will want to participate in trends or know what a trend is about. So you have to think about that while you're creating content. Some more questions, unless the panelists have some other thoughts on that. I think quite a simple one here, but other than captioning, are there any easy wins to make content more accessible? And I think we've gone over quite a few, but if there's any other little tips and tricks that come into your mind, just maybe small things that you have all come across in your journey.
Yeah, sure. Something that I haven't seen many people use, but something that I find really interesting, called tone indicators. So these are things like, for example, if you're using sarcasm, there's a lot of different ways of writing. It's usually like a / and an S to indicate that it's sarcasm. These are really useful, particularly for autistic people. Not using too many emojis, because I don't know if anyone has ever used a screen reader and had about 5 emojis read out to them in a row, but it's not an enjoyable experience and completely blocks like the actual bits of text that you are wanting people to understand. Yeah, limiting capitalization, so not writing things in all caps, because this then makes it really hard to differentiate between letters and different words. Yes, that's off the top of my head. Yeah, and understanding the differences between alt text and image descriptions and video descriptions, and using those accordingly. Yeah, that's
Great, thank you so much. I've just seen Caroline also having another tip in here. So Caroline, feel free to share what you've written.
Thank you so much. Just one other video audio specific one. Audio description refers to someone orally or there being an oral voiceover or in real time, an oral explanation of what is being shown visually. And that's something you can teach yourself to do if you're filming a tutorial rather than saying, okay, I'm doing step 1, I'm doing step 2, say I am pouring a teaspoon of sugar into my cup of tea. So you can say those things out loud so that you don't have to add them back afterwards and just remind yourself to make that a practice.
Great, thank you so much.
Just quickly, Bella, I'd be really interested to get Laura's opinion on easy wins from a more strategic point of view, in terms of whether Para Orchestra put it into their sort of, Lily mentioned evergreen content earlier, and I'd be interested to know if, Laura, you have any experience of sort of building from the early stages of a strategy, easy wins into those.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose we are quite lucky in that it's like embedded in the way that we create work. So right from when we first start talking about a project, we're already talking about accessibility, how this is going to present for hearing impaired or visually impaired audiences, how this might present for anybody with light sensitivities, etc. And we're making decisions at every step to say that's not something that we can, that's not necessarily going to be as accessible on this project. And it's kind of the same, I think, when we create content. We do have that conversation at the start, and we have to make a decision each step, and just decide if that decide what our standard of accessibility on that particular content is. I don't think I'm really answering your question properly. You might have to remind me what the question was, Fizz. It was sort of from a strategic point of view, wasn't it? You asked.
Yeah, I was interested in terms of if you have any tips from sort of building from the very beginning, because I know that in terms of our clients, that's something that is often sort of, when we're reacting to certain events, we will then think about accessible measures that we can use, but really they need to be implemented at the very start of the campaign.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that just being firmly nailed in a brief that everybody who's contributing to that content is on board with from the start. So in the same, if we're making a film, for example, we'd have the brief of the film and the tone and what we want, what the messaging is, what the narrative is, who it's for, the audience, etc. But also within that, how we are going to make this accessible and what we need in place in order to achieve that. Who we need in place in terms of specialist consultants, members of the team, musicians or artists that we can liaise with over the accessibility of that content. So yeah, I'd say it's just making sure that everyone is on board and is on the same, singing from the same hymn sheet from the start.
Brilliant, thanks so much. That was really helpful, I feel.
Definitely. A couple more questions as we've got a few minutes left of the Q&A. I'm just moving my way down the list here. One question was, are built-in captions enough for these platforms, or should I be producing separate caption files? Is one better than the other? I'm going to ask Lily to answer this one.
Yeah, I guess depends on where you're going to just be putting them, for example. I yeah, I would recommend burning in your captions on social media, because then I think there was also a question about when you're sharing content from other people, then if someone is also sharing that reel and it's got burnt in captions, these open captions, then when they share it, they're going to appear and that accessible content is shared. If you're using it on other places, for example, like YouTube, we still burn in our captions, but it can also give the flexibility when you are using closed captions, so when people can turn them on and off, for people to adjust how the captions are appearing for them, because some people might need their writing slightly bigger, some people might want to change the colors. For some people, for example, white might not be the most useful, they might need slightly more yellower, for example, if they have dyslexia. But definitely that's what we do, and what we commit to is to burning them in on our social media content. Yes. Yeah.
I saw Ben. Did you have any other thoughts to add to that?
No, you just about covered it off. But I would say if you are able to export your transcript separately, then I would say it's really, really good practice to do it for all the reasons that people have mentioned. But also because I think sometimes you get you can people say really profound things when they're in the heat of the moment, and actually having that just written down somewhere, you can not recontextualize it, but you can take that and use it elsewhere. For example, I'm not sure. I'm sure we've called things out for like funding applications, etc., etc. I just think there's definitely use hard coded burnt in captions, but if you can retain a transcript, then yeah, absolutely do that as well.
Great, fab. Another really interesting question that I've found is, have panelists ever found it challenging to describe artists' work in an image? So if it's really personal or political work, how do you capture that in an ID? And I'm going to make it a bit broader and say, actually, in terms of in other areas of short form content, when you're using very personal work or artistic work, how do you capture that and make sure it's true to the art form and artist? I'll raise that to the floor.
I have an answer for that, actually. Well, a answer. I'm sure there are many others. We aspire to work in consultation with each of our artists for them to have autonomy over how their work is described, not only their work, but also their physical appearance. We're not quite there yet, but we would, because I've just noticed in the questions, there's a few questions around describing ethnicity, describing disability. We always aim to include that within our image descriptions, but sometimes it's not always how that individual wishes to be presented in that way. So I think sort of covering this question as well, I would always go to that artist first and have a conversation, if possible, on how they want their work, their physical description to be presented. That'd be my answer anyway.
Just to add to that, something we do to help that process at Stopgap is that we have a form that we fill out with people that asks these sort of just visual descriptors. And in the case of describing diversity, we include descriptions of people's ethnicity and skin color, or other identifiers that we've asked them what language they want to use. And we also include this description if someone is white too, because this helps us to not assume white as a default. So if you're just describing someone's ethnicity or skin color, and you're not describing someone who's white in their skin color, it helps us to assume that white is not this default. And I also wanted to add on image descriptions and video descriptions and artists, is that image descriptions and video descriptions can also be fun. They can be playful if the work is playful. They can, if the artist's tone is really sarcastic or quite caustic, that can be part of the description. Personalizing yeah, and as Carolina said, alt text should not be fun. Alt text is the descriptor. And yeah, but the image description, this elongated description or the video description can be fun. And yeah.
Thank you both. I'm going to do one last question, unless there's any others that come in towards the end in the chat. And I think it's been sort of spoken about a bit in the chat as well. But what about making stories accessible? I don't think you can add in any image descriptions, so I think that's a really interesting one, especially when it's so short form.
Sorry, after you. No. Yes, I think we've touched on it already, but yes, stories are as a format fairly inaccessible. So I think all the things that you can do, such as including a good degree of contrast. I think Caroline had some good comments on this earlier, in fact. But and also, I guess, questioning whether something necessarily needs to be a story. I know that there perhaps feels like it's more of a place for these ephemeral things, but we have, just for example, we often get, because we will have ensembles of up to 50, 60 players performing on a project. You get some really amazing story content or some really fun behind the scenes, really organic, alive feeling stuff that people share into their stories. And so what we've done previously is, we might speak with our orchestra manager and say, hey, would you mind just putting my number in the ensemble WhatsApp group and saying, if anyone's got any fun images and videos, please send them over my direction. And then that can exist as a carousel, for which you can have alt text, image description and stuff, obviously with people's permission. So it's just, maybe thinking about how stuff can exist outside of the story in perhaps a more accessible format.
Just to add on stories, sort of if you're going to use any buttons or any links, or just sort of limiting how many you place on screen and how much you're requiring people to click on a really tiny button, for example. So sort of centering it and making it physically quite easy to, if people can, to press. And making sure that link is descriptive and telling people where to go. The same as with, if you're using a hyperlink, you wouldn't just say here for something. You would say, tickets are available, but that kind of thing.
Great, thank you both. I think we have time for just one more question, which I'm going to pose to all the panelists, just to round things off and say, what would be your ideal world in terms of platform accessibility for short form content? Whether that's in terms of the tools they provide or the kind of content they promote on their platform. I'd just be interested to hear about that sort of utopia of how we can reach everyone as successfully as possible, and maybe bring that into our own practices day to day. It's a very broad one.
I was maybe going to start with the platform taking responsibility for this, for access, for inclusion. And there are some places where things will prompt you, for example, you haven't put any alt text here. It prompts you to, do you want to add this? Do you want to do this? Kind of that. And sorry, that's my immediate thought.
Yeah, I suppose having more autonomy over the way that we create content and the way it's presented on various channels, rather than it being so locked down and defined by those channels, which is sort of what you were saying, I think, Lily, wasn't
it? Yeah, and I don't know. I think mine would just look like a complete tear down and rebuild, and maybe having something which is more like a public utility than a for-profit platform, because I think to a degree those things might always be at odds, but possibly a bit of a kind of worms for the final minute of the Q&A.
No, I think those are all really good points. I think we have to end it there. So I'm so sorry for anyone who has an extra question to ask, but please do feel free to reach out to any of the panelists or to anyone else who wants to put their email in the chat for people to get in touch. I'm going to pass it over to Fizz just to say a final word, or feel free to email HDK and we'll pass it over to any of the panelists that you'd like to reach out to.
Yeah, I just want to say a big thank you again to all the panelists and to the audience who have been so engaged. Really loved hearing all of your thoughts. I'm really sorry, Caroline, that we are now running over, so we can't, or maybe we can. Caroline, do you want a quick second just to share your final thoughts?
Thank you, but I've just been typing them all out, so hopefully folks can see them in the chat.
Okay, great, thank you. As always, there will be a recording of this on our website uploaded in the next couple of days. So if you want to recap, you want to watch it again, you can head over to our website and see it there. Otherwise, that's it for today. And hopefully you'll join us again for another webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Everyone, and thank you to the panelists again.